there's so much darkness. There's always good endings to them, which is quite interesting, but the starts of them, some of them are absolutely horrific, aren't they?
Hi, I'm Vlad Bresnix. Welcome back to the BresnixCast. Episode number 27, and Black Metal Week just keeps going and going, and it's only just getting better. So our guests on this show were the Dreamer and the Bearer from the excellent Old Corpse Road. And it's funny, every time I have a different band on, I get a new perspective on things, and this show is no different. You'll hear for yourself. I think you're really going to enjoy it. So before we get to our conversation, let's hear some Old Corpse Road. So from the Of Campfires and Evening Mists album, this is The Whispers of Long Meg Through the Solstice.
Thank you. massy strength, and stature score. The power of years, preeminence, and placed apart, to overlook the circle vast. Speak, giant mother, tell it to the morn, while she dispels the cumbrous shades of night. Let the moon hear, emerging from a cloud, at whose behest arose on British ground that sisterhood in hieroglyphic round, foreshadowing some have deemed the infinite, the inviolate God that tames the proud. To long men we are eternally bound.
Black Metal Week is reaching its conclusion, and I am here with the Dreamer and the Bearer from one of my favourite black metal bands, Old Corpse Road. Guys, thanks so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome, you're welcome. Good to be here.
And absolutely, and I'm a big fan. It's great to have you on, and this is a good way to round off Black Metal Week as well, especially considering our focus on, like, you know, sort of bands from Britain and stuff like that. So why don't we start the show this way? Why don't you tell us a bit, like, about yourselves and, like, how Old Corpse Road got started?
Okay. How did we get started? We basically, we've all played in bands together for maybe 20 odd years. And I think 10 years ago, was it 2007, wasn't it? 2007. We used to go up to the lakes every year and kind of had a bit of a black metal weekend, you know, just drink a lot of beers and play black metal. And we used to go and visit a place called the Old Corpse Road, go and walk over it on a Sunday to try and kind of get rid of hangovers and that kind of thing. And, basically we were bored with everything we were doing. We were all massive black metal fans. And you have one of them moments where you're just like, well, why aren't we just playing black metal? We all absolutely love it. So why don't we just do it? So, myself and the bearer just kind of went, yeah, let's just do this thing. We love it. Let's play it. So, there was just the two of us basically in 2007, got together, realized that the Old Corpse Road was kind of a cool name. I think at the time we really liked it, and just started writing music. And then next year we got basically some old friends back, like I said, we'd been playing with for years, who were weirdly all also black metal fans, but none of us had ever thought to actually just play black metal. So we all just got together. Everything worked really well. We all had kind of a similar vision and a similar way of writing music. Very similar ethics, I think. So the whole thing just gelled really well from day one. 10 years later, you know, with the same lineup we are when we started out. We write the same, everything's kind of the same. So it just worked well from day one, basically. And here we are.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. And one of the things I particularly like about your sound and stuff as well is, like, what seems to be like your incorporation of, like, stories and, like, myth and stuff like that. So would you say, like, kind of like, I suppose history and stories you can say are two different things, or sometimes it's the same, because as we know, a myth legend is like myth plus time, basically. But would you say, like, that's been like a really big influence on you?
Yeah. The history thing, I guess, it was something we were all quite heavily interested in. I kind of grew up in a village where my dad used to tell me these kind of folk tales. So Hob Headless and some of the songs that we've written about, I was told as a child for real. So Peg Powler, I was always told not to go down the river because Peg Powler would get me. So I kind of grew up with these stories and, found them really interesting from there. So they'd always been with me, and the other band members were always really interested in it. So it was kind of just one of them things. We were just sat there I think we had a brainstorm, didn't we? Of like, what do we want to sing about? Do we want to sing about politics, Satan, whatever, what are we interested in? What do we do? And we just basically brainstormed it, went through everything we loved and got rid of everything we just didn't care about. Politics went straight out the window. We thought, we're not interested in that rubbish. Satanism, as funny as it is, none of us are actually. And folklore was kind of the one thing we all focused in on and thought, yeah, there's some really, really great stories to tell here, and we all love them and we can do something with it. So we already had like quite a vast collection of books. I'm literally sat here with 4 more I've just bought to add to our collection, and we had all these books already. So like the source material was there. We all loved the concept. So it's kind of that natural, just, hey, let's just sing about this stuff and see if we can tell these stories and bring them into this kind of century.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's the thing I find really interesting. I mean, like, I'm a kind of guy myself, particularly. I like a lot of like folklore and myths and stuff like that, and I always have. And I've found as well that, like, you don't kind of realise it, but folklore is darker than you think, because when people talk about like fairies and stuff like that, in popular consciousness, Disney style, people think of like Tinkerbell and shit like that. But if you read about the fairies and like these old like Scottish, Irish, English folk tales, Welsh as well, like the fairies are bastards, man. They're really not like, they're not like these kind of little tiny women that come and help you out with stuff. They're like these, they're like these horrible things that like, they will steal your children and stuff like that, or they'll steal you and you'll be gone for years, but you'll think it's 5 minutes and stuff. And it's funny when like you think of the Disneyized version of things. Obviously Disney took a lot of like different European folk tales and packaged them in their own way, but when you read them, really, it's pretty dark stuff, man.
It's like, you're exactly right. You're spot on with that. And I think that's why we enjoy it so much, because the stories are literally so grim. there's so much darkness. There's always good endings to them, which is quite interesting, but the starts of them, some of them are absolutely horrific, aren't they? So yeah, a lot of them were used though, weren't they, to kind of control people? Like I said, the Peg Powler and Hob Headless were stories told to me to keep me away from the river and make me not leave the village. You know, they had reasons to control people, make things happen, and they sprang up from that. And they sprang up to explain bad things that went on in the world, you know, to help people understand things they didn't really understand at the time. So yeah, they all have a really, really dark edge, which kind of works perfectly with black metal, I guess. That's why they gel together so well.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And a good sort of example I have of that is my family are all Irish from like Donegal in Ireland. And there was always this forest that was there, and we were always told that it was haunted. And my parents and that were always told that as well. And then, like, we'd found out, we'd looked into it, and me and my brothers and that, and we'd found out that what had happened in that forest is a long, long time ago, like, we're talking, like, sort of early days of this sort of thing. They'd taken a lot of early sort of IRA members in there, the British had, and they'd, like, shot them all. So it'd become a folktale that you don't go in there because it's haunted. But the reason why they told kids that, obviously, was because of what had happened in there. And then that just became a thing later on. And later on, it had always been a thing handed down that you just don't go in there because it's haunted, even though it had become like a long, long time when I was young since that had actually happened in the first place, you know?
Yeah. That's exactly how they kind of grow and snowball, isn't it? And I mean, that's quite a modern usage of it, really, isn't it? There's in terms of the folklore we sing about, it's all quite old and ancient, and I guess one of the things we like about it is that it's quite timeless folklore. You know, it passes on. It comes from all different eras, and I find that really interesting. That this one you're talking about is actually quite recent, isn't it? Relatively.
Relatively, yeah.
Yeah, and some of the ones we're singing about, you know, what was Hob Headless and all them. Yeah, you're talking back Viking times and that kind of thing, and then even back from that. So you've got this whole span of history that folklore works with, which is really nice. You know, mythology kind of sits into certain timelines. You know, obviously Greek, Roman, Norse periods all have that kind of set timeline, whereas folklore is just timeless. Basically, it's quite cool like that.
Yeah, I think so. And even like, I don't know if you're familiar with like the Joseph Campbell work and stuff like that. You know, like he showed how even in a lot of like modern stories, you know, that classic, all these classic narratives that you find in mythology and folklore, you know, things like the hero and like these different archetypes that, you know, like you can find in like your own life, and you can find them in different stories, and you even find it in like sort of modern films and things like that. It's just packaged in a different way. And yeah, it kind of shows you that these folk tales are like timeless and classic, and they tap into things that because a lot of these tales are written like so long ago, and they tap into things where you're like, oh, I know someone like that, or someone that's like, or it tells you a message that it's been something that's happened in your life. So it's funny how this stuff can be a long time ago, but it shows in some ways how like humanity is just like the same, if you know what I mean. Yeah,
I think that's one thing that we kind of drew us to the folklore, that it's got that connection with man. I think we're all in the band. We love nature and going out and walking and visiting all these places. Walking hills and all that is brilliant, but the thing that maybe attracts us the most is where kind of nature and man meets. And like you said, it kind of, every story still makes sense now in one way or another. There's that kind of connection between nature and us, and basic human nature hasn't really changed for thousands of years. It's all the same.
I think there's that element as well where you can tell a story and it's essentially fantasy, but somewhere on the line it's stemmed from, you know, a real-time event that's been twisted into this fictional tale that's sort of far more interesting to digest than perhaps where it originated from. And you know, there's that link that'll always be there. There'll be the same story told another 100 years later with a different name, a different character, a different place perhaps, but ultimately the same message, so to speak.
Oh yeah, totally. I know exactly what you're saying, and it's interesting how that stuff gets packaged. I mean, even like one of the things, like I like a lot of the Celtic and Norse mythology, and you know, like a lot of the things they say about a lot of those sort of big figures that you would think of in those kind of like in those stories, you know, not even just like Odin and all the rest of it, but you have all the Celtic gods, you know, the Tuatha De Danann and all these sort of things. And the interesting thing about that is a lot of people speculate that, you know, some of this stuff was probably based on real people, but obviously over years and tales and legends highly exaggerated. Like, you know, obviously they didn't have these kind of special powers and things like that, but they do think that they were based on like these real people and stuff like that. And it's interesting to dig into that. And not only that, but, I'm thinking about it, so I'll just throw it in. I did read a book, and I can't remember who wrote it now, but it's on the shelf somewhere. But it was about like how the sort of ancient Celtic pagan religion and the ancient Norse religion were essentially the same, and like probably came from like sort of descended from Hinduism. So they say Indo-European, so probably from people moving from India and things like that. But they say like this ancient Celtic and Norse religion was probably very similar in a lot of terms, even, you know, just substitute this god for that god. And it shows you that thing, how like story and stuff like that, because obviously even if you look at Buddhism and stuff like that, all those stories were handed down orally. That's why you read some old Buddhist scriptures and it seems like they're repeating themselves all the time, but it's so they could remember it because they were handing it down orally for so long. And I think that's the thing. I think people sometimes don't think about handing down stories, but in music like yours, you know, what you're doing, I think is like preserving the stories and then putting like a kind of modern musical spin on it and then handing it down in another way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I literally pretty much answered the question itself there. That's exactly what we kind of did. Yeah, we wanted to kind of capture these stories. When we research them, we tend to find various sources of the same story because there's always variations in them. And we pull together all the best sources we can and create what we think is the best version of that story we can get together. But that's us taking all the different pieces of evidence we can, putting them together. And then, like you said, we kind of then hand that on and someone else will take it from there and tell that story. And it's interesting. You talked about the kind of Celtic religion, the old kind of myth stories there and the old Norse. And that was kind of one of the routes we were originally going to go down. Even our demo has the Song of Emerging on, because we were quite interested in the kind of Celtic mythologies and, like you said, the kind of 5 different races that were in Ireland. And we did start out, and Song of Emerging is like our one song that's a bit stand out because it's the one we did about mythology before we moved on to folklore. But then I think personally, I maybe speak for myself now, but I found a bigger affinity with folklore than I did with mythology after a while. I started, I was kind of the same as yourself. I really enjoyed Norse mythology, really enjoyed kind of Welsh and Celtic. And somewhere along the line, I started reading more folklore, and I could kind of connect to that better, you know, because it's connected to real places and kind of you can go and visit these places and kind of connect to them a bit better than you can with mythology. So there's like kind of a natural progression away from mythology into folklore, which is quite interesting for us.
Totally, I understand what you mean, and as well when you live in like one of these places, I'm kind of like, I suppose, like, in Britain, you can't get away from, like, you say, like, I could say, like, I live in a historical place, but I suppose everyone does in Britain in a way, you know what I mean? But, like, particularly where I am in Glasgow, I'm close to a place called Battlefield, and it's called that because, you know, there was the Battle of Battlefield in the 1500s there, and it's funny, like, stuff like, so there's a hill up the road from me, and there's a monument there, and it's supposed to be that, like, Mary Queen of Scots stood there and watched the battle down in Battlefield. It's further down. Now, we actually know, even though there's a monument there and there's a plaque that says it, we actually know from basic history that it's unlikely she would have stood there because the castle that was beside there that she owned, well, not she owned, sorry, the castle that was beside there was owned by people who were unfriendly to her family. So it was very unlikely she would have been there. She would have maybe somewhere close, but not there. But it's interesting how you have these myths and everyone around here will tell you, oh yeah, she stood up there and watched that because there's the wee monument up there, but it's not really the case. But it's funny how even these wee things will persist like that, if you know what I mean, like locally. Yeah,
they do, but I think it's because people like to believe, don't they? It's almost like a religion, I guess. People want to enjoy these stories because they're so kind of either inspiring or exciting in one way or another. So it's kind of a natural thing for people to enjoy that kind of thing, even if maybe deep down they know it didn't really happen. They're just good. You know, I know Hob Headless now doesn't hang around near the river where I was and doesn't stop into the village. You know, it's kind of obvious. But I kind of, if I
You're
ever
not scared of him.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not scared of him anymore. But like, I like that feeling. Do you know what I mean? If I go for a walk from my village to the other village, I like that feeling of walking along, thinking about that story. It's kind of weirdly comforting and kind of exciting at the same time. Although, yeah, like you said, the reality of it is pretty much very, very different.
That is funny. It's good how I think it's good. Like we talked about a couple of ways, like, so it can be just something that people like, or like in the example of like the forest where all the IRA guys got killed, it can be something to keep people away and stuff like that. So it's interesting, like different ways in which you can use this kind of thing. Yeah. But let's talk a bit specifically about you. I like to go off on tangents because that's why people listen to this show. That's what we like about it. We're not just doing the normal thing, but like. So if Campfires and Evening Mist's your most recent album, so why don't you, and obviously this is very rich with story and stuff like that, so why don't you tell us a bit about that?
As in the music or just the whole concept?
What, the whole thing, like, obviously because, like, obviously the music is tied up with the concept, I suppose.
Yeah, it was kind of, at the time when we first started writing it, we'd been to, was it Thornborough-Henge?
Yeah.
We've been to Thornborough-Henge for the Beltane Festival there. And we normally go to it every year and just go and hang out for the weekend. And we'd been there and we were writing an album at the time. We had this idea of, we watched obviously the ritual they have there, the opening of the circle and the closing of the circle. And we were kind of like, this is, I don't know, we just liked it, I guess. It's a really cool process. And it was really interesting. We'd never done an album where we wanted to kind of make it into a bit more of a concept. So the idea kind of came about that we'd have the song opening the circle, and then basically the album would be a process of, like you said, storytelling, imagined around a campfire. So it was basically us telling a set of stories, and then the closing of the circle was the end of the evening and basically putting out the fire and everyone kind of going on their own way. So, the album from the start had a really kind of warm feel, we felt. Witching Hour was a very dark kind of gothic album for us. And this new album kind of had a warmer feeling to it, like that kind of late evening campfire feel to it. So it all kind of came together feeling like that atmosphere. So it was quite an atmospheric album. So yeah, it just all kind of gelled. That concept of lighting a fire, everyone gathering together to tell stories and going home became the concept of the album. We picked, at the time, I think we just picked songs we were really interested in, didn't we? They were just the good stories we were enjoying. And that was kind of it. The concept came together and off we went and got the whole thing recorded. And then obviously we got the deal with Cacophonous to release it, which was for us a bit of a coup, being kind of long-term Cradle of Filth fans, which
we'll talk about that. Oh yeah, Cradle of Filth have come up, but yeah, we'll talk about that.
But like you were saying about British black metal earlier, we're all big fans of the British black metal scene, so it was a bit of a coup for us to get on Cacophonous. It was kind of the perfect label. But that's kind of it. It was a theme that came together nicely, and it just, for us, we know when things feel right. Things just come together, and when they feel right, we just go for it. And that album felt right with that atmosphere and that kind of theme.
And there's kind of like, I feel like there's a folk music influence, like I'm a big folk fan as well. Like I grew up, my dad was in a folk band and stuff like that. So I really grew up into folk music and stuff like that. And I feel like, in certain ways with your tracks and stuff, you've got that kind of influence. And I suppose that goes back to the storytelling and stuff like that,
That's it, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting with our music. I think we tend to incorporate folk music in a more traditional sense than say what you would class as a folk metal band. It's basically black metal with these folk moments, rather than what, if someone said folk black metal, you would think of a lot of the sort of more pagan-y sounding bands from Europe, wouldn't you?
Like Isengard or like
or anything like that. Early Enslaved, I guess all that kind of stuff.
It's important to capture a more traditional folk, not traditional in terms of, traditional instruments or anything, but more a traditional folk sound rather than folk black metal, if you like.
We avoid, I think we've we avoid the hey nonny nonny type
Yeah.
of folk.
I mean,
and
there
go
are
for
some,
a darker
obviously
take on it.
some jovial folk moments in all of our music, but it's a minimal thing.
But there is such a cool darkness to folk music as well, you know, and even like, because I listen to a lot of like, say, maybe like, you know, like folk music, like sort of underground folk music and stuff like that. But even if you want to like, think about sort of mainstream folk music, you could take like the Pogues. Now everyone obviously knows, I was talking earlier show with St. Fenton about this, but like, and the Pogues, like everyone knows like Fairy Tale of New York and all that kind of thing, but when you dig into their albums, they had all this dark stuff like Down in the Ground Where the Dead Men Go and stuff like that, the Turkish Song of the Damned, you know, like, and if you're really a person that's into folk music or country music is the same way, you realise that, like, you know, these are traditional forms of music, but, you know, it's incredibly, a lot of the content is so dark, like darker than rock music sometimes, but it's just the way it's packaged. You don't think of that.
Yeah. I think for us, our inspiration has come a lot from, I don't know whether you know or remember Cold Meat Industries and Cold Spring. They're both kind of record labels that basically did kind of dark ambient stuff, but you know, a lot of it was medieval.
Well.
Yeah, a lot of it. Bands like Dead Can Dance.
The kind of like the dungeon synth sort of thing.
Yeah, kind of. Raison d'etre, I guess. Arcana are on like the biggest influence for us, but that's all really, really dark. Basically, the dark ambient scene is really dark, and it has medieval and folk edges. And I think a lot of our influence came from there. There were bands we got into really early on, and kind of back then when black metal was just starting out, these kind of, especially Cold Meat Industry was kind of highly connected to black metal. You know, there was a kind of a link there between even though, you know, totally different extremes of music, but I think the themes and the feel of the music was very similar. So we were drawn into that kind of scene, and I would say that's where a lot of our inspiration came from. I'm kind of looking along my CDs now, and there's like, I don't know, there must be a couple of hundred all just dark ambient CDs that just, it's all about atmosphere over anything else, which is really, really inspirational for us.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's really like come out of black metal, because it's the thing where like the whole post black metal thing and atmospheric black metal or black gaze or whatever you want to call it, you know, part of Black Metal Week earlier on in the week we've had Fen on, Frank from Fen, you know, and they're a great British example of that kind of like that kind of music. And it's interesting, I think, how black metal's moved on, and you do get some people, and we have talked about this, but we'll bring it up again because you have to. And, you know, some people who are like the old black metal purists and stuff like that, who want it a certain way and it has to be this and that and all the rest of it. But that's why I particularly wanted to feature a lot of the British bands as well, because I've liked black metal for a long time, and I love the difference in the British bands. You know, like some of my favourites are, for example, Yous, and you guys, like, you have that folk influence and you like that storytelling thing, and you have like Fen, and it's this like really grand and atmospheric sort of thing. And then another band that we had on that is a big one for me is the Infernal Sea as well, but it's different for them as well. They're kind of more satanic and more brutal. And it's interesting because you have this diversity, because everyone, like, well, not everyone, but like, you know, people from kind of my age, when I got into black metal, you know, like my brother used to get Kerrang magazine in the 90s, and then there was the black metal issue, and it was that thing. I've mentioned it on the show before, but it's just worth mentioning out just now. Like, you know, I was kind of fascinated by it because you had this Norwegian scene in the 90s, and it was like, you know, you would see guys like Alice Cooper and like Marilyn Manson, and they're people that are playing a character and they're playing it very lucratively, whereas these guys were like people who were saying they're evil, but they were actually like doing stuff like burning churches and killing people, like all this mad shit, and you were like, they're taking the act way too seriously. Like, do you know what I mean? So it kind of, that's what got all the focus, you know, because it was so crazy and such an extreme scene. It was
indeed. It was kind of, I can't deny it was, back in the day for me, it was pretty exciting and kind of cool. It shouldn't have been, but it, you know, it was that danger and excitement that kind of attracted me to it. And then when you combined it with the kind of quality of the music, that was coming out of the scene, it was really, really hard not to
fall for it.
Yeah, get really kind of sucked into it. But you know, when I was young, you kind of you get caught up in this stuff. Even before then, I remember, you know, listening to Carcass when they first came out, you know, and being thinking their album covers were absolutely incredible because of all the dead bodies of them. You know, it's just attracted to that kind of extremity. And yeah, I mean, it was a crazy scene back then, undeniably, but it's led to some amazing things, and a lot of people, I guess, they've all grown up a bit now, and it's led to quite an awesome scene. But you touched upon the state of the English scene. When you were saying it, I was thinking, God, we've been asked this kind of question, or we've discussed this so many times, how it's so unique in Britain, black metal. There's kind of, you know, like Norway has a sound, Sweden has a sound, you know, most countries have a, you know, Greek black metal. They all have a sound, and you can pretty much tell where a band's from just purely by the sound or the style of their black metal. The brilliant thing about the UK, and it's really kind of eclectic. There's just such a weird mix of everything. You know, when you go from bands like Balsagoth to like Ebony Lake to Cradle to Hecate, it's just a really mixed batch, but every one of them is just so weirdly British. You know, it's just not tangible. I don't know how
you
to.
Can't put your finger on it.
I can't put my finger on whatever it is, but there's just something very unique about each of these bands that have this sound from the UK, which I think is a brilliant thing. I love it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I did kind of touch on that when I was talking to, like, I talked about it with Frank from Fen, but also more so from when I was talking to Dean from the Infernal Sea, because we were talking about how, like, say even aesthetically British black metal is different because, say, you have, like, you know, bands that don't use the corpse paint and stuff like that, you know, or like the guys in the Infernal Sea that wear the plague masks or something, so that's just an aesthetic difference. But musically, sonically, if you want to put it that way, there is a difference. There is something about it, but it's hard to. It's one of those things where you know it when you hear it, especially if you're like British. Like, you know it if you hear it, you know. But it's hard to kind of explain in words. But if you hear a British black metal, it's very hard to say. But you just know it. You know, there's just something. I think it's like that with a lot of different types of music. It's like you know it when you hear it.
Yeah, that's very true. There was we were at band practice the other night, and we've sent off. Oh, am I about to give some away? We've sent off some songs for the new album to be mastered.
We will talk about that.
But what was interesting was we were discussing with the guy who was going to mix it what he wants, and we were basically saying it needs to be atmospheric. And then he's going, what's atmosphere? And we're kind of trying to put that into words and going, well, so we basically had to give him a list of bands and go, right, go and listen to this. That's atmospheric. That's what we want, but it's nigh on impossible. And it actually happened.
One sounds different from the next.
Yeah.
Some blend of those styles.
Yeah. And it happened with Campfires as well. And it was that kind of, right, we need it to sound British, but we need it to sound atmospheric. Make that happen. We can't put it into words exactly what we want. We just know in our heads. And like you said, you hear it, you put an album on. I remember at the time it was Nazzle, and Black Seed was one of the songs we put on, and we listened to that and we were like, yeah, the atmosphere on that was incredible. And that's kind of what we wanted, but it was just it just wasn't tangible. We just couldn't find a way of kind of getting that across. So you're right. You know it when you hear it, but explaining it, yeah, it's not impossible.
Black metal though, is it? You know, the doom and the UK doom scene, the UK grind scene, it's just something different about it than the other scenes of those styles. You know, to doom, you've got the Danish scene, and that's sort of Sweden and as well. To have that doom style, but UK had a different style that just was British as well. And again, you can't really put your finger on it.
No, that's true. I mean, you do hear that with different types of music as well. Like, you know, that's the thing. You kind of like, something even with just like rock music and that, you know, like just milquetoast rock music, you know, British rock bands just kind of sound different than like, say, American rock bands or whatever, you know, it's just one of those things. I know what you mean as well. There's a lot of crossover with like the doom scene and stuff like that in black metal. I was talking to St. Fenton, and they have massive like crossover with like the doom and the sludge kind of thing. But they do it with like black metal blast beats and stuff like that. So, you know, it's something that they mix together. And it's quite interesting because like, you mentioned Cradle of Filth earlier, and me and Frank from Fen, we talked in quite depth about Cradle of Filth and stuff like that, because they're one of those bands that it's like, I've talked very negatively about them on the show, previously. And the thing is, like, it's like that way where, like, I know they're probably the most, like, they're basically the most, like, successful British extreme metal band, but the thing is, it's just like, sometimes it was just, you're listening to it and you're like, man, like, has Danny got his tongue in his cheek here? Like, you know what I mean? Because you're like, he must know that this sounds fucking ridiculous. But the thing that Frank from Fen was saying to me that was quite interesting was he was basically saying, like, look, Danny Filth has had all these different band members and they're writing the music pretty much, you know what I mean? And he's just kind of going through it. But like, it's interesting because I think we should talk about Cradle of Filth because they're when people think of black metal from Britain, they automatically think of Cradle of Filth. So like, what's your like general opinion? I know they've had some good stuff and some fucking howlers, but like, tell me your general opinion.
Incredible band, really. I mean, you know,
I suspect we're going to differ on this. I'll let you go first.
It's easy to cast off their post-90s material as not that good, and I can fully appreciate why people don't like them at all, to be honest. But if you go back to 1994, 95, when you got into them, and certainly me, maybe a year later, they were just amazing. I can't. It's hard to put into words, really.
They weren't a joke when they.
No, that's it.
When they happened in '94, you know, when Principle came out, and there was that radio interview, wasn't it? I've forgotten the program it was, and I remember listening to that, and they were being interviewed on that, and they came across as a lot more serious and a lot more kind of how my mindset was back then, and it was a lot more interesting back then. It wasn't so much a joke, and since then, they've done silly things.
Yeah.
They've become a bit more human, a bit more personable, and people have kind of seen different sides to them. But that initial first few years, you have Principle and, you know, Vampire and all of that. It was really exciting times for me in black metal. It was an incredible phase. And then, it kind of all went a bit wrong after that. And
the key members left the band, in my opinion.
All right, well.
But that had always happened anyway, even
they've had so many members years. Now, it's just not the same band anymore. To be fair, the last few albums I've actually really, really enjoyed.
Yeah.
But it was just a different atmosphere back at the beginning, and I still have kind of, it's like any, you know, when you first get into a scene or you first get an album, you know, you really fall in love with it. So that kind of era really was quite special for me. And obviously that's why it has such a big influence on us, doesn't it?
I think it's maybe a lot of nostalgia now for us. Yeah. It'll never go.
And then, Cradle have never done anything like their first album again. They gradually changed, didn't they?
Yeah.
And nobody does anything like they did on that first album, which is kind of like why we almost wanted to do it, because we were like, this is like such a cool thing they've done here, and nobody's doing it anymore. And I guess it just shows how big the influence was on us, because we play like that, not kind of by choice, just naturally, you know, it just had that bigger impact, say on my drumming or the Bears riffs. That's where we ended up.
And it's interesting as well, because I mean, like, Cradle of Filth, one of those bands that, like, obviously, like I said, I'd heard about like the sort of scene in Norway in the 90s and stuff. Well, Cradle of Filth, one of those bands that were British at the time, that I thought, like, when I was a teenager, I was quite impressed by it. But now, like, I would describe it as kind of like hammer horror black metal, if you want to put it that way. You know, like, that's the kind of thing I think of it. I think there's not
they kind of distanced themselves, didn't they, from black metal? And I think that was almost one of the points that was a bit of a killer for me, when they kind of they distanced themselves and said, we're not a black metal band. And it was kind of like, well, you kind of are, but, you know, and then then they did start doing things that weren't black metal anymore, and they went off on their, you know, the big journey of the different albums. But even, you know, the end of Dusk, there's that speech, isn't there, with, you know, the Principle black metal masterfulness. It was like, a black metal band, you know, and it for me personally, it's just more in my head, I guess, but you felt kind of a bit abandoned by that, because it was the black metal scene that made them what they were. And then they kind of abandoned a bit. They, even just the way they dressed, they changed, you know, they got into all that kind of leather.
Yeah.
And when I was young, I was very into the kind of goth scene as well. A bit like, ironically, Danny and all them were. And we used to go to, like...
Me too.
We used to go to, like, the Whitby goth weekends. You know, I spent all my time at Whitby. And it was all very kind of Victoriana back then. You know, you were in kind of, you know, top hat and tails and that kind of stuff. So...
like, you thought it was cool, but then you think of it now, you're like, man, that looked ridiculous.
Yeah, do it now. back then, back then it was kind of cool, and I liked that scene. And then
yeah, absolutely. And I know what you're saying. I was the same guy.
There you go. Yeah. So when that got abandoned by them, and they went into all the leather and the PVC, and they kind of essentially, what did they? They went in Metal Hammer and drank bleach and all that kind of rubbish, and sat in baths with rubber ducks.
Changed the atmosphere. Lost the atmosphere.
It killed it all, and it became a bit of a joke. But that first radio show, when they were talking about, I remember that little bit where he's talking about graveyards and saying how
strong carriages and
they were highly evocative, and they helped write their music and all that, and that's kind of what I bought into at the time. Whereas now, Danny, he's kind of a bit of a stand-up show now, and he's a bit of a comedian, and that kind of classic authenticity is gone, which I think we keep in that. We want to be authentic in what we sing about. We don't want to be a kind of we like having a laugh, but we don't want our music to be a laugh, if that makes sense.
I think your music has got so much more than that. I don't think it, I think, like I was saying of it, that's why I led with, the myth and story kind of stuff, because, your music and other British bands, even we're talking about Fen and stuff like that, they're, the Fens, they're kind of that's where their atmospheric sound comes from, their environment and stuff like that, and I think that is quite a good thing. That's why I think you're based on more... That's why I wanted to feature these bands, because everyone thinks of Cradle of Filth and stuff like that. And like I said, it's hammer horror, kind of some of it's kind of pretty embarrassing, let's face it. But at least when you hear other bands like yourselves, at least you're based in something real and something rooted in something proper.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how some of these bands like Cradle of Filth, I mean, I can see in some ways why they achieved the popularity they did. But, I don't think that they are the best representation of British black metal. I just think they're just so parody-ish. I know, obviously Danny's doing a lot of this on purpose. I actually think it was, maybe not, no, never mind the Buzzcocks, that's what it was. I think it was Simon Amstel, who said that they'd gone into Rome or something like that, and they had, whatever it was, I don't know if it was t-shirts or the lanyards they were wearing had whatever explicit images on it, but they got arrested in the Vatican City, I think Danny and whoever else, and I think it was Simon Amstel who was hosting the Buzzcocks at that time. Anyone British will know it. My American listeners, look up Nevermind the Buzzcocks. But I think he said the judge sentenced them, it was a joke, he said the judge sentenced them to 3 weeks of sodding off and growing up, and I kind of thought that's kind of apt for what I think they've kind of I know why they've got that mass appeal, but I think it's kind of sort of a juvenile appeal, and if you know what I mean.
Yeah, there's perhaps another way to approach them as well, in that you may get, a young listener who comes across them because, now they're played on, Kerrang TV or whatever, and they've got a much more commercial sound. And they might go, oh, this is really good. What else is out there? And may get into what we would deem as better black metal bands.
They're like a gateway drug.
Gateway band,
The gateway drug is a good way of putting it.
They still have a value from that point of view, because, a lot of people might not have heard of black metal at all if it hadn't been for bands like Cradle and Dimmu, bands who've got big, So I kind of have to keep my admiration to them, for that reason, really.
I guess it's like anything. I like something until it gets big, and then you moan about it.
I'm guilty of that. I'm wildly guilty of that.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's wrong, but you can't help it.
I probably wouldn't have played black metal when I did if it hadn't been for them being Metal Hammer CD, and that was that. So it is.
And that is the thing. I think that's kind of the problem, because, like I said, I've talked on the show about how I dislike Cradle of Filth, but there is that sort of thing that when I was impressed by it as a teenager, then I got into other great bands. Like you're saying, the gateway drug thing. It's so perfect an analogy, because it's true. Because you might listen to this and it's a bit silly and a bit stupid at times. You know what I mean? It's a bit sort of hackneyed. The sort of we all know Cradle of Filth, right? Anyone's listening to this knows Cradle of Filth. But it's the thing where you hear other stuff and you're like, well, I like My Bloody Valentine and I like shoegaze music, and then you hear Fen or something like that, and then you're like, oh man, mixing this together. And I did do the black metal purist thing for a while when I was a teenager, where it was if it's not it's not raw and it's unmastered, then that's black metal, I did that whole thing, but kind of shy. But like, I know it's funny, but like, it is that kind of band where like, like you said, I think Gateway Drug is the perfect analogy, actually. So, what would you say? Like, this is an interesting scene as well, interesting thing as well, because like, so the 90s, like, Norwegian scene, obviously, everyone thinks about that, you know, like, that's where everyone's mind goes when they think of black metal, because even like me just like announcing I was doing black metal, we got some people to go like, oh, racism and things like that, like, you know, this kind of nonsense. So like, when did you guys get into black metal? Like, what was the first kind of thing? Was it the 90s thing, or was it kind of like, was it the 90s Norwegian thing that got you first into it, or was it later on?
No, for me it was. It was basically Immortal Battles in the North. It was buying a Beherit CD because it had a cool front cover, drawing down the moon. The release of Principle, Master's Hammer. I was trying to think of all the, and it was like this kind of group of bands that we, you know, we started buying Terrorizer. I think I actually have Terrorizer 1, 2, and 3 sat around. I'm even looking at a Terrorizer Out of Control cassette tape sat on my wall at the moment. So it was, yeah, I mean, that like really, I was still, I would say I was more like a bit late to the party, but it was about 93, 94, I think. I kind of got into the scene. I was already massively into the death metal scene before that. I was already hugely into kind of Carcass and Napalm Death and all them kind of bands when they were kind of kicking off the late 80s. And then one of my friends got this, I'm sure it was Immortal.
Yeah,
and he just played it to me, and I just thought, I remember listening to it and thinking, this is fucking awful. What is this shit? And he played it to me, and like, you know, you have one of them moments, and then
you want to listen to it again.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, I'll listen to that again and again and again. And then, yeah, it just kind of snowballed from there. And that's kind of when I went elitist back then, because the scene was so kind of underground. And a really good friend back then had some kind of decent connections down in London who'd been going to, I remember them telling us stories of going to see Cradle of Filth and all going with knives, you know, like kind of crazy shit, all going with knives. And we got Balsagoth's demo, and we got Hecate Throne's demo, and we got Cradle stuff. So we just had all these, you know, being up north, I guess it was harder to get stuff, but we seemed to have some good connections, and we managed to get tapes and that kind of stuff, and just really get sucked into the whole scene. And because I was kind of, I don't know when I was, like 16 when it was kind of, when that was happening. And I just kind of really got sucked into it all at that age group. And yeah, I kind of pretty badly got swallowed into it, if I'm honest. It got quite, I don't think we got serious, but I remember us writing stupid stuff to the church and all sorts of dumb teenage crap. And, you know, that just seemed evil and black metal. But yeah, we got caught quite heavily in it. And then, you know, like you said, you kind of get out that phase, you come out the other side of it, you grow up a little bit. But it was kind of weirdly important.
It stays with you.
Yeah, it was kind of, I don't regret any of it, you know, as stupid as that. You know, I look back on it and laugh at it. It was like as stupid as well. I don't regret it because it was great fun. And, yeah, so I was quite elitist, but then, yeah, you grow up and you open your mind a bit, don't you? And you get back to being a normal person, but I still absolutely love that scene, and still, even God knows how many years on, it's still, I look back on it with fond memories. I still love it now. It's still a brilliant scene. It's got so much good stuff in it.
I was totally and I absolutely 100% agree with you, because that's the thing. It's just like, it provided something different. And as well, I think like a lot of people that are into music, they were into like the fact that it was like, well, it's like how I like industrial music and things like that. It's the fact that it was rebellion against like traditional song structure, against traditional music. You know, it's like why I like I said, industrial and harsh noise and things like that. Yeah. You know, it's all that thing where it's like, it's good music, but it's like, it walks that line, because you have to walk that line, because sometimes like experimental or kind of rebellious music, whatever you want to call it, it can be shite or it can be really good. You know what I mean? Like, it just to be nonsense noise, or it can be excellent. It just depends on how the band walks that line. But like that's one of the things that always like, got to me about black metal. It was just like, it's even hard to explain. It's just like, it's one of those things that when you hear it, you know, like with the blast beats, the way the music is, especially I think if you're from somewhere like, It's funny, like, you know, black metal originated in like places like, you know, like Europe and stuff like that, but I hear bands from like Saudi Arabia and things like that where it's like completely illegal to do that kind of music, and they have this, then they do black metal, and it's amazing because it is like, it's pure rebellion.
It always confused me, if I'm really, really honest, when we started getting black metal from even just America. I remember when it first happened, I was like, nah, this doesn't work. You get black metal, you know, Americans, black metal, this is wrong. And like, it was because it was elitist, and it was, you know, it was British and it was European, and you were kind of stupid like that. And then as time's gone on, it's kind of exploded, and people have gone, no, you know, black metal can actually sing about different matters and different topics, and it isn't just kind of lakes in bloody Norway and medieval stuff. Yeah, that it has to be connected to it. Suddenly it's opened up, and suddenly, you know, some of these American bands are, well, just from all over the place, like you said, are absolutely amazing. And I've had to kind of open my mind, and we're talking years and years ago when I was, like I said, more elitist, when I thought like that. And it's all the boundaries have been crossed now. Every topic matter's almost been brought into black metal. It's expanded so much, but it needed to do that, and I'm glad it has done that, because the stuff that's come out has been absolutely amazing.
Pretty much become one of the most, well, if not the most diverse extreme metal genre, isn't it? Because there's no boundaries. No, I suppose there's no boundaries to any genre, really, truly, but it seems easier to blend them in with black metal successfully.
I think the nice thing about black metal, though, if you take, like, I don't know, maybe grindcore and death metal and kind of stuff like that, they are just a sound, aren't they? Yeah. They're kind of stuck, whereas black metal can sound so
completely different.
Yeah, you know, have a classical influence. Yeah. So, you know, it's just such a massive scene now. It's amazing, and it's really, really cool. But it's because it's got a theme and a different like kind of ethic than anything else. Yeah. You know, you can't expand on other genres as much as you can with black metal.
Not successfully, I would argue. No. But I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it's making my head spin just thinking about it. I'm looking at my CDs going, oh, there's just so much. It's just such a mixed thing. And I've got in front, I'm looking now at like my walls of CDs, and you know, the jump from styles is just, you know, I can even see bloody Christian black metal sat in there just because it was great music, you know. It's just like, it's just insane what the variety you've got available.
You said it's like probably the most like diverse extreme music scene, and I think you're kind of right, because like you have that kind of people that still do the kind of raw kind of 90s style black metal, you know, like the Norway style, but then you have so much differentiation. And we had Billy from Unrequited on the show, you know, he's Canadian, he does like the post black metal stuff. And he does it more of an American mix. We've had Frank from Fen on as well, and he does it in the more British style, but it's funny, you can take that post-atmospheric black metal style and you can compare Fen to Unrequited, and it's very different, you know, and Unrequited is more based on like the kind of American, Canadian sort of experience, if you know what I mean. It kind of like, it's different from the British experience, and even if like, we're talking mainstream rock, like if we just want to do that, I mean, like Oasis or the Libertines sound different from like, say, the Killers or something like that, you know what I mean? It's just like, even if you want to put it that way, like it's kind of different. It's the same, but it's different.
Yeah, that's true. For some reason, the mix of, when you talk about rock, and you've mentioned the Killers and Oasis. The thing is that they're rock, and they have a staple set of instruments, don't they? Black metal isn't even, you can literally have like a band like Profanum, you know, it's no guitars, it's just drums and keyboards and a gas even over it, but it's still black metal, you know. And then, like I was talking about Cold Meat Industries, they had bands on there. They were, was it Diabolus Rising, you know, stuff like that. They were essentially industrial black metal, you know. I mean, they didn't have anything. Everything was just on a keyboard. Beherit did electronic doom synthesis. You know, that was just a keyboard and a drum machine.
The atmosphere,
but it's still black metal. Yeah, it's a totally different instrument set. So you know, black metal almost takes it to another extreme. You know, because in pop music, you know, if you started using keyboards, like, you become a dance band, don't you? Or you become whatever, you something different. Whereas in black metal, you're still somehow a black metal band, even though you literally have no instruments in common with other bands. It's very strange.
Well, that's the kind of thing where, like, black metal did, like, you know, what we're talking about now, we're saying like, oh, it grew into this and that. But if you kind of look at it at the time, I mean, like, say Philosopheme by Burzum, like, that was like 1993, and that was incorporating a lot of elements of shoegaze and that kind of thing, what we'd now call black gaze and stuff like that. And that was in 93, and obviously dark ambient. I mean, you even had, what was the thing Fenriz from Darkthrone did? Oh, the Dark Ambient project, oh god, I forget the name. Like, they had like songs like Caravans to Empire.
Actually, I'm going to go look at my CD collection because I know exactly what you're talking about. I just can't think of it.
So like Fenriz did that great dark ambient project. It was amazing. It was like Caravans to Empire.
Neptune like Towers.
Neptune Towers, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, amazing. Amazing, like, experimental electronic kind of like, but it was dark, and it was like, oh, it's funny, like, I had on, like, Eric Hernandez from that band Wrong, and they do more of a kind of, like, kind of stoner metal sort of thing, like, but he was talking about how he listens to a lot of classical music, and classical music can be heavy, and he's like, heavy music isn't, we were talking about how heavy music isn't necessarily distortion.
Yeah.
It's not only that, it's sometimes heavy in the way it feels and the vibe to it, the atmosphere behind the music you're presenting. That's what makes it heavy, really.
Very true, very true. Well, that's kind of how dark ambient works, I guess, isn't it? It's like some of it's heavy as hell, but it's like, it's just, what was it when we were talking to Arcana? We asked them how they get their sound, and they just said sub bass, lots of sub. That was it, that's it up.
And like, we're coming obviously towards the end of the show here, and like, it's been a great conversation. I've enjoyed talking to you. So like, obviously your last album we were talking about, it came out in 2016. So, are you guys working on something new? Like, what is the future for Old Corpse Road? Tell us.
Yeah, I mean, basically, we've never stopped working on stuff. Even before that album was released, we were always writing new songs, and inevitably that's become what will be the next album. One thing we've always kind of done in the band is it's very DIY still focused. We've always, to some degree, recorded everything ourselves, and particularly with this album has been completely tracked in-house ourselves. So we've had, if you like, the luxury of being able to plug away in the background at this new album, and it's in its final stages, basically. Can't really say a lot about it just yet, but it's getting there, isn't it? I'm quite excited about it.
Yeah.
And I think there's perhaps more of a sense of accomplishment in this one than any, in a way, in terms of how much we, especially the recording side, having done basically all of it ourselves. We'll get it professionally mixed and mastered, obviously. But so
it's another, if you want to know in terms of the music, I guess it's definitely a change from Campfires again, but again, not a deliberate change. Campfires was never a deliberate change from Witching Hour. We always said that album was kind of just a reaction to it. Witching Hour, like I said earlier, was very dark and gothic, and for whatever reason, the next album we just felt it was going to be a reaction to the darkness. So the last album, again, being quite atmospheric, the new album, we feel it quite clearly is when we listen to it. It's very dark. Very dark and very aggressive. It's more like the fastest album we've ever written.
Definitely the most intense album.
When I sit and play it to people at the moment, we're kind of letting a few friends have a listen through to it. I'm kind of sat there going, there'll be a nice bit in a minute, there'll be one of our bits. And it's like, no, it just keeps going fast. So it's definitely like quite a dark album for us, and kind of, a long way from Campfires. So it'll be interesting to see what people think of it when it comes out. We're pretty close now, I think.
Pretty close.
Yeah, that is really cool, and I'm very excited to hear it, actually. I want to change the perspective of black metal with this week, and this will be kind of one of the last shows in Black Metal Week. And I think it's a good place to kind of like put this kind of in here. Like, I want to kind of change the perception, because people have this kind of still this 90s perception of what black metal is and stuff like that, but it's evolved and it's grown. And, Fenriz, God bless him, and I've said it before, but Fenriz, you're welcome on the show if you want to come on. God bless him, he said, black metal died in the 90s, and, you understand where he's coming from, but I just, with music with me, like, I love how black metal, like, merged with stuff like shoegaze and stuff like that. Cause I was listening to shoegaze music, like, I always loved, like, My Bloody Valentine and, like, the Jesus and Mary Chain and all those kind of bands anyway. At the same time, I was listening to, like, Mayhem and Darkthrone. And I like that stuff. And I actually like how it's come together, even despite me being, like, that small period where I was an edgy teenager where I was like, man, if it's not from Norway, it's not black metal. But that's just you being an edgy teenager, you know what it's like. But I just love what black metal has become, and that's why I wanted to do Black Metal Week, because if you just stay there, you know, I've said it on the show loads of times, and the listeners have sometimes said, like, stop mentioning this, but I'm just going to keep doing it. If you're the same way that you think that only black metal is good if it came from Norway in the 90s, you're like the guys that were Bob Dylan fans, and then as soon as he picked up an electric guitar, you got pissed off and you were like, oh, it's not Bob Dylan anymore.
Well, that's exactly it. And I think you mentioned Fenrir saying it's dead. And that kind of era, I would almost agree. It is dead, but it matured into something far better. You know, it was that kind of serious phase it went through that attracted the hardcore fans. We all loved it. We all got to be a bit grim and silly for a while. And then just kind of transitioned them boundaries, and it's grown into basically an absolute monster. But it's, where it is now is the best place it could be. And it doesn't seem to be getting any worse. It seems to be growing constantly.
Even you look at these originators in Norway, you've got, you know, the guys in Emperor all doing vastly different music now. Mayhem, I mean, their albums now sound nothing representative of classic Norwegian black metal anymore. You know, so even those bands, you know, look at Markaturus and what's his other band from the 90s? Ulver. You know, he listen to Ulver, and he's doing nothing like what he started out with. So even those purist scenes that the original people are writing nothing like that anymore. So
everyone's moved on.
You know, it's at the same time, sometimes that's what you want to listen to, though, don't you? You want to listen to some classic, you know, straight up black metal.
Yeah, it's still there.
The moments there, that's what you want.
It doesn't have that kind of elitist feel anymore. It's
got a classic feel.
It's the music's still right, but it's open to all now, isn't it?
I don't know, totally, and I know what you mean, like, when you want to listen to that straight up, like, my favourite, like, if someone says to me, like, I've met a few people and they're new to black metal and they're like, what would you listen to? And I'm like, Death Crush by Mayhem, always. Like, you know, it's 17 minutes, it's got a lot of different elements, and, you know, it's early black metal and it's fucking amazing. Like, you know, I've got a Death Crush t-shirt. I've got, you know, with the album cover on the front of it, like, and it says Death Crush on the back and it's red. Like, so I wear that all the time. I love that shit. But like, we're coming to the end of the show, and, guys, this has been a great show, because that's the thing. This is going to be at the end of, you know, Black Metal Week, and I think we're updating, we're changing what black metal means to people, and specifically, you know, obviously I'm biased, but like, I don't care, because like, my bias is to like promote the British bands and stuff like that. You know, we all know the extremity of the 90s in Norway and stuff like that, and people want to sometimes tar some people with the same Varg brush, but like, you know, we're not doing that, you know what I mean? Because it's changed and it's become something like British black metal is completely its own thing. And I think British black metal has been underrepresented for an awful long time.
Yeah, totally agree. That's why this is such a good interview. It's a totally underrated scene, and ironically got some of the best music in it. There's just so many good bands in the UK. It's actually frightening. So this kind of thing needs to happen more, I think.
Definitely.
It's something we kind of struggle with as a band, even just in the UK. We're kind of up north, and trying to find contacts and work your way into Europe is so hard. Meeting the right people, you know, to get us over there. And the British scene, there's just so much good stuff in it that needs to get out there. But it's definitely underrated. Definitely needs all the help it can get.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And like, you know, black metal's taken a couple of hits. Like, we won't go into it. We talked about in other shows the whole tacky thing and stuff like that. Like, we won't really talk about that in this show. But like, that's the thing. Like, it's taken so many hits. But like, the fact is, like, it's a pure good That's pure good music. Yeah, it just sounds daft. No, it's a pure form of music that, like, you know, like, I suppose it's like industrial and things like that. It's like, in a way that it's like, it's harsh and some people don't understand it, but if you're into that kind of thing, you really get it, you know. And the fact that, like, use a lot of, like, history and stuff like that, you know, I've always, like, you know, being into history as we were kids, our parents used to take us to see castles and stuff like that, you know, like, and I would love that kind of thing, you know. And it's when you hear like metal that, like, it's not, that's the one thing that I will put at the end of this show. It's like, you know, you get some metal and like you get like Viking metal and stuff like that, or you also get some kinds of metal that it's like, it's kind of cheesy and stuff like that, like when they're looking to the history. But that's, I think, why I like black metal more than those other types, because it's not cheesy when it's looking at history. I mean, maybe one or two bands, but like the good bands like yourselves and stuff like that, you know, when you're like doing history and myth and stuff like that, there's no cheesy and hackneyed stuff, you know, like you're actually taking something that we all know and understand, and you're putting it to some like incredible and challenging music. And I think that that's what the power of black metal really is, that people don't understand, you know.
Yeah, I don't think I could say it better myself. It's
brilliant, and let's not
just say we said that. Yeah, ditto.
No, amazing. Like, so guys, so thank you so much for coming on the show. I think it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. It's been brilliant. Really good. Nice challenging questions. I like it.
So my thanks again to the Dreamer and the Bearer for coming on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation. Some excellent points of view. It was really enjoyable, and I hope you liked it too. So that is it for another episode of the show. The website, BresnixCast.com. BresnixCast.com. Follow me on Twitter at Vladimir Bresnix. And to finish off, well, what else we're going to listen to? We're going to listen to some more old Corpse Road. So this is Herne of Windsor Forest.
Dreadful.